We are fortunate to find many places of great natural value across our planet. From green taiga forests to vast heathlands, majestic mountain ranges, and leafy oak woodlands. All of these ecosystems are home to many species, us humans included. It is largely up to us to ensure that such richness of biodiversity and landscapes is conserved over time in a way that is relevant for human communities around the world. Similarly, human communities, through the way we use and manage natural areas, play a relevant role in nature conservation. Understanding this relationship between people and natural areas is fundamental for achieving an inclusive approach to the preservation of nature.
The Global Biodiversity Framework not only calls for the expansion of protected areas across the world, but to the recognition of people's rights in the management of their own resources. Therefore, consideration of equity and justice issues becomes crucially important to the conservation of biodiversity globally.
Inclusive conservation is an approach to protected area management that aims at restoring and conserving biodiversity more effectively. It encourages dialogue between the various stakeholders of a protected area, such as recreational users, local residents, local businesses, land managers, farmers, researchers, or local governments. It differs from traditional top-down management approaches in that it strives to find a just solution that balances the visions of different stakeholders in order to develop sustainable policies and strategies for protected area management.
The inclusive conservation approach to managing protected areas has been at the center of research project ENVISION. Working with a variety of stakeholders, the project has examined the consequences of different visions for protected area management in the regions of Västra Haag in Sweden, Kromrijn and Utrecht Heuvelrug in the Netherlands, Sierra de Guadarrama National Park in Spain, and Denali National Park and Preserve in Alaska in the United States.
For inclusive conservation to succeed, methods that emphasize local and regional participation, engage diverse stakeholder groups, and facilitate reflection on potential futures and landscape change in protected areas must be embraced.
Although the 4 protected areas studied in ENVISION deal with different pressures, they all tackle a common challenge: establishing management policies that consider the visions present in the area and adapting to changes, while simultaneously ensuring the integrity of the area's biodiversity in a way that benefits both people and the environment. Get ready for a journey across our 4 study case areas to see how inclusive conservation has been applied in each one of them.
A central part of inclusive conservation is to consider and connect the visions and preferences of stakeholders and their strategies for managing the landscape. Mosaic landscapes in particular support a range of different livelihoods, and these come with different visions for how the landscape should be used and preserved. Västra Haag Nature Reserve in Sweden provides a clear example of such a mosaic landscape with various stakeholders. To advance inclusive conservation, we need to investigate and understand things like the history of the landscape, who the stakeholders are and their visions, governance processes, but also how different land uses interact. These internal dynamics between actors, institutions, and processes are a source of uncertainty. But they may also point to solutions by revealing different management strategies that actors may use to work together or adapt to changing circumstances. In Västra Haag, we organized an iterative stakeholder engagement process. This included interviews, participatory mapping, asking people what they value in the landscape and where, a survey to identify consensus, disagreement and uncertainty around key issues, and a workshop for people to discuss commonalities in their visions and collective actions.
Protected areas aren't always isolated from the rest of the landscape. In fact, they're often embedded in landscapes that have multiple users, like the one that we have in the Dutch study area. In order to better understand how protected areas could be best developed, we need to assess the consequences of different visions. In the Dutch study area, we have conducted interviews with local stakeholders and residents that had different visions for the area. We mapped the areas that they saw as providing many functions. These maps gave us insight into where different visions overlap and where there is potential for conflict or synergies. Presenting these assessments to stakeholders can support the identification of shared visions, and it also can help us in finding the best possible inclusive conservation strategies for how to manage a protected area.
Landscape change is occurring at very rapid rates in the Arctic and the subarctic regions of the world. And with that, we see increasing levels of uncertainty and concern being expressed by local residents. People can also experience feelings of helplessness from these rapidly changing conditions because landscape change is influenced by factors that operate at a global scale rather than a scale that's within the control of individuals. Establishing a dialogue about the future of protected area management is unquestionably important because there are distinct value differences among members of local communities, particularly in the Denali region. As a research team, we have positioned ourselves as a sounding board and an outside entity that can listen to different perspectives and synthesize what we have heard in this process of reporting back to local communities on our findings. That is, we're working to absorb information from people that live in the Denali region through individual and group-based discussions, and then simply reflect back what we have heard. Charting a course for inclusive conservation will require breaking down the tensions across different stakeholder groups, such as those found in the Denali region. So this process for decentralizing decision-making and raising visibility of the underrepresented stakeholder perspectives is very fundamentally important to creating more sustainable and equitable futures.
In protected areas surrounding populated cities, like the Sierra de Guadarrama National Park nearby Madrid in Spain, there is a diversity of stakeholder profiles, and these have different perceptions, preferences, and also requirements for the uses and the functions that the protected area should provide. We have invited stakeholders to both individual and collective reflections and have discussed about land uses, current drivers of change, management preferences, and also their visions for the area. We have used techniques such as participatory scenario planning, visual facilitation, and participatory mapping. Along the whole process, we have also been strengthening a collaborative work with the decision makers of the Sierra de Guadarrama National Park, so that we can facilitate that our findings on the governance can be used for evidence-based decisions. In ENVISION, we have developed a decision-making toolbox for inclusive conservation. We have collected all the tools that we have used along the process of the project, which we think can contribute to inclusive conservation, and have had them refined by local decision makers. The toolbox has been uploaded to Panorama web platform managed by IUCN, and we hope it can support decision makers in crafting more resilient strategies that can better adapt to global environmental change and overall support more inclusive conservation.
Given the continued degradation of biodiversity around the world, it is evident that we need to reconsider how we manage protected areas and plan conservation measures. Finding creative ways to enhance inclusiveness can help achieve benefits for both people and the planet.
There is increasing awareness that conservation and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems can yield other benefits to society, and this includes adapting to climate change and the risk of disasters, and also coping with wildcard events, such as the current global pandemic. The awareness of the multiple benefits of conserving and restoring biodiversity and ecosystems is reflected in global agendas, and these include the Global Biodiversity Framework, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Paris Agreement, among others. And one of the key ways to implement these global commitments effectively is developing, piloting, and upscaling inclusive conservation approaches.
In line with the EU Biodiversity Strategy to 2030, inclusive conservation ensures that the voice of every interested party is heard. Therefore, having some commitment over the biodiversity targets, by considering the voices of every stakeholder in the management of the protected areas, ENVISION helps a future better implementation of the biodiversity target.
Some of the main learnings from the ENVISION project about inclusive conservation and sustainable land management relate to the fact that by employing multiple methods, it is possible to identify the synergies and trade-offs between different visions for protected area management. However, there are some important limits to inclusive conservation that need to be addressed in future research. For example, how to develop the science of identifying conflicts between stakeholders that have different interests or positions on protected area management.
Inclusive conservation means going beyond just checking a box for stakeholder engagement. It means enhancing engagement with communities by giving back to them, continuing with exchange, recognizing and valuing their points of view and their unique knowledge, and building mutual trust and respect.
Throughout ENVISION, we have worked in tandem with the true protagonists of inclusive conservation, the people working, living, and enjoying protected areas. It's time to hear from the stakeholders themselves how inclusive conservation has been advanced in the 4 case study areas in practice.
Ja, det finns flera olika intressen. Dels så är vi ju många som bor här mitt i reservatet eller i anslutning till reservatet som nyttjar det på våran fritid i och med att det ligger så bra till där vi bor. Sen har vi då markägare som äger lantbruksmark och även skogsmark här, så att det är ju ett reservat som nyttjas av många flitigt. ENVISION har ju hjälpt oss på ett sätt att bli mera varse om värdena här för vår egen del. Att vi sätter mera värde på det på ett annat sätt, även om vi lever och verkar i det här och vet hur värdefullt det är. Men det har tillfört en dimension till.
Inclusive conservation is the only option for conservation in a very populated area as the Netherlands. In the Utrechtse Heuvelrug area we already developed approaches which are very much within the sphere of inclusive conservation, and I think they provide promising results. If you look at the more agricultural areas, then the controversies are harsher. And there you also have the question of economic power. Efforts have been made in the past, but we have to do a better job and have to find a specific form for inclusive conservation in which interests are more balanced.
And when we are talking about interests or visions regarding the Sierra de Guadarrama National Park, we have to say that they are very diverse. Depending on the group of stakeholders, we find economic, leisure, cultural, educational, or research interests. The ENVISION project has given the administration the opportunity to think about what national park we want in the future. And it has also given us the opportunity to get in touch with different stakeholders, listen to them, and especially detect the needs of participation, because one of the conclusions of this project for us is that people are requiring for more spaces for discussion, spaces for participating in the decisions.
One of the outcomes of the ENVISION process that I think is important was as the residents, as the business owners, as the agency representatives sat and discussed the future of the Denali region, everybody was in agreement of looking at how is there a balanced approach to having both, growth in the tourism sector, growth in other sectors, at the same time ensuring that the natural resources that we all enjoy in the region remain, protected. I think it's an excellent step to be engaging with the residents and the community and the agencies, and to have that cross-pollination, discussion between them. So it's not, as agencies and land managers, we're not, thinking about or making decisions in a vacuum, that we're having a more inclusive, engagement, and also have additional, eyes or views on the problems and opportunities that we're looking to address.
As ENVISION draws to a close, we are happy to look back at what we've accomplished. Although there's still a lot to be done, the joint effort of our project partners and the local communities of the 4 protected areas bring us a step closer to achieving inclusive nature conservation, one that is enriched with all necessary visions and viewpoints, that doesn't shy away from conflicts, but aims to solve them with a constructive exchange of ideas. One that is ambitious enough to envision change in the long term to ensure a prosperous future for protected areas around the world.